Welcome to the Analytics Power Hour. Analytics topics covered conversationally and sometimes with explicit language. Here are your hosts, Mo, Michael, and Tim.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Analytics Power Hour. This is episode 184. Happy New Year. It's the first episode of a brand new year. And, you know, when you think about years past, especially maybe the most recent two, nothing is more true than that we've all navigated so much change, so much alteration, so much need to adjust our thinking and actions, maybe more than at any other time in our lives. You know, as analysts, we're definitely close to change in our careers, which is a good thing. But sometimes inhibiting change or the expression of analysis, there's a lot of risk that comes with being that person that has to speak up and harpoon someone's important pet project or data story. And it's sometimes kind of difficult. Tim, you're the quintessential analyst. I mean, you basically remain the same, but I mean, you've probably observed this change in others I was talking about, right?
No, I'm usually pretty oblivious to other people's behaviors and feelings and emotions. I just harpoon ideas.
Harpoon ideas. And that is why I love you. Well, anyways, you are my co-host on the podcast. Welcome. And Mo, also our co-host. You're always engaged in change. I mean, has it been more pronounced for you over the last couple of years? I laugh when I say that because it's like, what, maybe?
Yeah, I guess a bit, sure.
A bit. That's right. And I'm Michael Helbling, and yeah, we've gone through some change. So we needed a guest, someone who's done quite a bit of analysis, providing insights, maybe even written a book about it. James J.D. Long is the Vice President of Risk Management at Renaissance Re. I think that stands for like reinsurance. I don't know. He's one of the authors of Our Cookbook. You probably know him from Twitter, where he is under the name @CMastication, which is cerebral mastication. And he builds models, and I'm pretty sure he builds them better and explains them better than all of us, which is why we're super excited to welcome him as our guest. Welcome to the show, JD. It's an honor.
Thank you guys so much for having me. All my models are wrong, I guarantee you.
But are some of them useful? That's the question.
But I love the way you described it very nicely. It's like, yes, like George Box says, all my models are wrong, but I do a really great job figuring out when and where. And I thought that's a really great way and a smart way to do that.
Paper is that what the paper really says if you read it?
So what in my LinkedIn profile at one period of time, it just said basically, I build wrong models. And my skill is figuring out if they're useful or something. And I got an amazing number of people being like, you can't say that. Right? Like, and I'm like, if you don't understand that's a reference to George Box, you probably don't want to be my friend or whatever we are on LinkedIn anyway.
I don't want to interview. Yeah.
I don't want to talk to you if you don't understand what that's a reference to.
So I think one quick thing to get out of the way is sort of, been hearing a lot of rumors about who's going to play you in the movie about your career and life. And Leonardo's been mentioned quite a bit, but also Matt Damon. But I mean, who's the front runner in your mind?
Oh, that's really tough call. It's hard to say. Matt Damon, I'm a big Bourne fan.
Oh, there you go.
So, that's kind of neat. I'd like to kind of bring that energy, into spreadsheets and R. So maybe that's where I'm rooting, but they don't let me have any say in this, right?
He overcomes his Boston accent for so much. So you figured give him a real challenge to get into that Western Kentucky.
Exactly.
That's right. Coming soon to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Our Cookbook, the movie.
It could be there's Mark Wahlberg is sort of, the black horse there, right? He's coming in from behind.
I could also see maybe Benedict Cumberbatch or something like that.
There we go.
Anyway, lots of good options. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, JD, your career has spanned many years and you've done some amazing things, and the work you do is pretty impressive. But I think it's kind of interesting because when we started talking a little bit about topics to cover, we kind of landed on sort of a really interesting one, given sort of the quantitative nature, if you will, of all of our work, which is around sort of how do you manage change? How do you provide psychological safety for analysts and for analytics within organizations? And I was curious, as we kick things off and get into a discussion about it, sort of what's propelling that interest for you, or what made that something that was sort of interesting and top of mind for you?
One of the things, and I think you'll see this in other folks who kind of come on podcasts and speak at conferences, often what we're doing is we're working out loud ideas that we've been thinking about. And the whole talking about it on Twitter, talking about it in a podcast, or speaking about it at a conference, we then get feedback. We have conversation at the bar, conversation later, and it helps polish some of these ideas. Some years ago, and it's been a number of years, it was when I lived, it was pre-COVID, right? A whole other era. I gave a conference presentation about empathy and empathy as a technical skill, and likened it to machine learning. And it's sort of like how I train myself to understand your experience, right? I'm building a model inside of me to help me understand what you're doing. And I sort of worked on that idea for a while and thought a lot about managing of people and relating to technical people. And I loved when you had Hillary Parker on here and she brought in empathy into that discussion. I thought that was fantastic. So an extension of the empathy is when you start thinking about teams of people. Empathy is often just a one-on-one sort of concept. When you start thinking about teams, you start trying to think about how do I make an environment so there's space for empathy, and what are the factors that are making like our team less functional. And a whole bunch of this is guy I work with who heads up the team I'm on had brought up this idea of psychological safety, and I thought it was like really interesting. And part of what was most interesting is he does not consider himself a very like empathetic, tuned in to people's emotions kind of person. And because of that, he thinks about it a lot. And as a result, he ends up being better at it than most, right? And that's a real irony. He doesn't feel like it's his natural strength. So he thinks about it, works on it, and ends up being better than some of the folks who think it's their natural strength. That's development mindset, right? And so we think a lot on our team. Renaissance Re is known within the reinsurance industry. And by the way, I have to say, I'm not here representing RenRe. Right? I'm here representing me. And stuff I'm going to say, you'll find people at RenRe that disagree with it. But it is the place that I work. And it's the place where I think about a lot of these ideas. We're known for having a bunch of really smart people. And as a matter of fact, I came in to work there with a guy and he has a PhD and I just have a master's degree. And we had a conversation and just a master's degree. And he said, and basically I said, wow, here at RenRe, there's so many smart people. And he was like, here at RenRe, there's so many smart people. And his eyes got big. And I'm like, yeah, it's funny. Same words, very different. Like, is that an environment that you feel like you're going to flourish in? Or is that an environment that's intimidating? And I realized people were having both experiences in the same organization. Some were coming in, it's like, I love this. I go talk to people and they mention methodologies and tools that I've never used. And I'll ask them to explain it to me. And they tell me, and they wrote their master's thesis on, wave transforms and how these signal processing happens. And to some folks, that's super intimidating. So how do you have an environment where you have people with PhDs, people who are super smart, and you have analysts who are right out of college? How do you take that environment and make it where people can grow as opposed to just place where people are petrified?
Totally.
And that's the context of where I was introduced to the idea of psychological safety, right? My boss says, we got to figure out how to make the team psychologically safe. And we started talking a lot about, well, what does that mean? And I assume that's what we're going to, and rather than me delivering a homily here for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to pause and
I'm enthralled.
No, I don't mean to be delivering a conference presentation here. I'll do that in time, but this isn't the right venue. So
I just have a really quick question before we dive into other questions. So since you've been looking into this, so what would you say would be the impact on a team of someone coming in and saying, just do your fucking job?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's more like a joke.
No, I totally get it, because at some level, I'll tell you where you mostly see this. You see this when the business and IT start working together.
Oh, sorry, Tim.
And sometimes the business guys, like the IT guys, kind of come in and say, let's talk about field definitions and what they mean. And the business guys are kind of like, isn't that your job? Can't you just do your freaking job?
It's a quote
he was trolling me.
Tim might have used many times in moments of frustration. But Tim is exactly like what you described, I will say, because he thinks about it quite a bit. but he
I
only
won't
tells
admit
people
it.
who know they can handle it. Do your fucking job. So if he ever tells you that, it means he thinks really highly of you.
It's a term of endearment, is what you're telling me.
That's right. That's what you should take away from that. Anyway, sorry, I couldn't resist. I was like, that joke's been living with me for weeks now, so we can move on to serious topics now.
Okay, Helps, can we stop the trolling?
Yes.
Because I literally can talk about this topic for days.
Me too.
The issue, JD, that I'm going through at the moment is that I feel like psychological safety is the new buzz tech term that every team is like, oh, we've got to have this thing. And it's not at my current work, but at previous companies, I have definitely had the situation where it was kind of like, we're going to start talking about this thing and everyone feels psychologically safe and we can have radical candor and all this crap. And the truth is, no one trusted each other. The environment was incredibly toxic. And throwing this on the top was like throwing fuel on a dumpster fire of like, you can't just, like, it sounds like the conversation for you was quite organic and like, how do we start thinking about this concept versus I think sometimes the leads in the team being like, we're going to have this thing now and everyone's going to rally behind. And it's like, but this person doesn't like this person and this person hates working with this person. And this is a really terrifying place to start if you don't have like incredible trust within the team.
Well, that trust in the team is the psychological safety, right? And that's why you can't dump it on top. And by the way, I think it is possibly, it's definitely orthogonal to radical transparency, and it may actually be out of phase with radical transparency, because I see radical transparency and here I'm referencing specifically in the Ray Dalio sort of context of, we leave a meeting and we all work through the punch list of correcting each other for everything they did wrong in the meeting. I've never been in one of Dalio's outfits. I have seen people who operated like that, and I have never seen it produce an environment that's healthy. I am not saying his environment isn't. I'm just saying I've never seen it, and I've never been in this environment, right? And I have trouble imagining, given what I know about human psychology, I have trouble imagining that working, right? I think what ends up happening is you end up self-selecting pools of assholes who all work together. And possibly tough-skinned people, right? People who can just take abuse. And so you self-select a group of people who can all take abuse, and you lose whole sections of good, possibly contributors who just couldn't put up with that crap. I couldn't put up with that crap, right? I'm just not wired that way.
My mind is blown right now. This is
like Abraham Wald's airplane, right? Of psychological safety. I'm basically saying so Abraham Wald's airplane is the airplane with all the red dots. And what we're basically saying is, the airplanes that land were the ones that were not hit in a critical place. So you never saw the critical places get hit, right? So that's Abraham Wald's airplane. All right. So in radical transparency or whatever, what you basically discover is, we got this high functioning team, and the thing we do is we all critique the shit out of each other after everything we do. Well, what you're not seeing is all the people who just couldn't put up with getting the critique crap, criticized out of them and everything they did punched out, right? So you're not left with the people, you didn't create the environment that got the most out of your people. You selected the people that could work in your toxic environment.
Which seems like it would wind up just from and this was several years ago, we had a balanced teams and diversity. We've had a few different discussions that sort of talk about the benefit of having diversity. And I hadn't really thought about that, and that's usually, that's diversity from a cultural, gender, race, but mentality as well. I would think if everybody's kind of even if you're making assumptions about what your customer wants, and you've got it seems like there would be a special kind of groupthink that would start to occur if that's kind of the team that has been built, is all of them that could, make it through that particular gauntlet of abuse, or some would say efficient communication.
Yeah, exactly. But you basically introduced a filtering crucible that everyone has to go through, and it filters, right? It doesn't create a certain type of person. It filters. So the people who aren't, and now it may make certain people more that way, but it just filters out a whole bunch of people. So we said, okay, we want a healthy environment. We don't want a filtering environment. Like, how do we do that? And in my mind, the biggest area where you can see this is how do you handle mistakes in a team? Like, what's the team response when there's a mistake? Because basically, it's all bullshit and fluff until somebody F's up. And then you're going to figure out what your culture is. Because you're going to have a bunch of rhetoric up until that point. But when somebody makes a real mistake, you're going to learn what your corporate culture is or what your team culture is. Is it a culture of blame? Is it a culture of anger? Is it a culture of fear? Or is it a culture of development?
But here's the thing, okay, with mistakes. I suppose I'm probably not as far in the psychological safety journey as you by any stretch of the imagination. From a simplistic view, my approach has always been like, if a mistake happens in the team, it's my responsibility because I'm the manager of the team, right? And that, I feel like, I don't know, this is obviously way past blameless postmortems and the rest of it. But if that's the example that I want to lead, but then I guess share with the wider organization, this mistake happened, blah, blah, blah. I take responsibility for it. And there isn't a healthy culture around mistakes in the rest of the organization, that can lead us down a very dangerous path for me personally. But I suppose that's the stance I've always taken. So can you talk to us about how we get to that blameless point?
Yeah, I have seen this in organizations I've been a part of where we have very safe, maybe corners, and I'm in that corner. And then there's other teams and we interact with them and they do not have the same level of safety. I watched this happen where we did an analysis and said, oh, ops team stopped recording, this record that they used to record because they got really busy and they didn't realize anybody else was using that field in the database, right?
Yeah.
Totally can see how that would happen, right? Totally. It was a miscommunication and we wrote that up and documented that. And then somebody from that ops team is basically like, why'd you throw us under the bus? We're like, we just thought we were being transparent about, because we felt safe, but we realized, oh, their team isn't safe, right? In the way that our team is safe. So I learned a real lesson about how that team feels about their psychological safety, right? And I learned, okay, I need to work with that team and also help them trust us, because we just hadn't worked a lot closely together because we're over here doing one thing and they're doing something else. And I realized, culture can be unevenly distributed across an organization.
Totally.
And, it can produce these frictions. So I think the first is you got to, not all mistakes, right, within a given team need to float out of that team. And so if it doesn't have to float out of the team, no problem, right? There's going to be no impedance mismatch between your level of safety and the rest of the organization. At some point, there may be something that has to float out. At that point, it's like the team lead needs to broker the conversation. And I don't know what that looks like, right? There's too many moving parts depending on the organization, but the team lead needs to do that. Now, ideally, if you've got psychological safety at higher levels, you can work that out. I'll give you an example of one that I was a part of. And it's basically we at the 9th hour changed an SQL query and made a greater than or equals to a greater than by accident in an edit. And it messed up a date selection. And a bunch of things that should have been included in a window were dropped out because they were equal to. And they got dropped out because of that selection window, right? We have all seen mistakes like this. And it triggered a cascade of corrections internally of having to say, hey, we produced an exhibit that was discussed at these meetings and it was incorrect. Here is the corrected version. And we went through kind of how it had happened and did a blameless postmortem and discussed it with our juniors in our team. I had made the mistake. Nobody else had touched it. It was mine. I mean, literally mine, not just I'm taking it for the team. Like I had made that mistake. And so our juniors got to see me make a mistake. And I bring this up with all our new hires. And I tell this story because they need to understand, I wasn't drug out in the street and shot, and you won't be either. Now, what we did do is we said, we did that when we did the blameless postmortem, right? Or the postmortem of it, we realized what happened. What we got into was we were making changes at the last minute. And we didn't have enough time for a second set of eyes on the changes to review it. And so we got in a hurry and we we made ourselves try to move too fast, and we should have known better. And basically the takeaway wasn't that JD's a screw up, although that may be true, but the takeaway was we're gonna not do changes within a week of some report date, so we can get more eyes on any changes, and we're going to do basically a no changes window and freeze things.
Yeah.
And if a C-level executive says they really want it, we're going to say no.
It's interesting because it's Hillary Parker, and I can't remember. We touched very, very lightly on it when we had her on the show, but she wrote, when she was still at Stitch Fix, she wrote a paper where she talked about and this is, I had not made that connection until you're giving that example. You're not a bad analyst. You weren't willfully trying to make a mistake. You weren't being sloppy. It was actually a process issue, and that the process was in place that said, yeah, scramble and make these changes up till the last minute. You can cut a corner, a code review, or something else. And to me, that was like such I will carry that point from her for the rest of my career, where she was saying,
it was a very good one.
Don't blame the analyst. Like, what was in place in the process that enabled that? It's interesting. I guess it's not that will prevent the mistake. It's actually minimizing the impact of the error or preventing it from getting to production. It's fine that the sequel got, tweaked. It's just, if somebody was looking at a diff and said, that's odd, why did you change it from a greater than or equal to a greater than, in just a second?
It would have jumped out, right?
Yeah.
It would have jumped out. Which, by the way, you just made the best argument in the world why business analysts who are not professional developers should be storing things in version control, right? That wasn't what I'm here to proselytize, but it is one of my high value points. I am in a business team. I'm not an IT team, right? But one of the things that we have all of our analysts do is they use Git. And we use tools that can be stored as plain text, right? So lots of Python, lots of SQL. In addition, I use a little more R than most. But
that's just because you're more enlightened. Let's just be clear. So
but plain text diffs are super valuable for things like this jumping out. And it also allows like better commenting, right? Somebody can just look in there at one of my peers and comment and say, hey, well, this doesn't seem quite right. And it's easily shared.
All right, let's step aside for a brief word about our sponsor, ObservePoint, a platform that helps you measure a very important gap.
What gap is that, Michael?
Well, the gap they help you mind the gap, is between what you think you're measuring on your site and what you are actually measuring on your site. ObservePoint automatically audits your data collection to give you that visibility on an ongoing basis.
That's right, Michael. Essentially, you set ObservePoint up to check your site on a recurring basis, telling it what to look for and where, and it does that automatically, alerting you immediately if something goes wrong and providing automated reporting so you can track the results over time.
And ObservePoint's privacy compliance capabilities keep tabs on what customer data you're collecting and how to ensure you're remaining compliant with digital standards and government regulations.
All that, and they have great taste in podcasts as well. So if you want to learn about ObservePoint's data governance capabilities, you can request a demonstration at observepoint.com/analytics power hour. Now let's get back to the show.
So there was one of the things when we were kind of kicking this around, and you referenced Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed, and I can't say I've read the book, but I wound up like watching one of his like TEDx talks where another thing I had not recognized, in the whole TEDx talk, which is very good, 15 minutes. And he talks about, fixed mindset versus growth mindset. In that, I think it started to make the connection that you kind of need to have a growth mindset goes hand in hand with the psychological safety. And I guess that kind of goes into it's fine to fail as long as you fail forward, or that's, if you're not pushing yourself, I guess. Is that how that ties?
The way I think about it is, does an analyst get there, or a person I'm working with, right, doing analytical work, do they get their identity from being the smartest asshole in the room, A, and B, do they get it from being perfect? Because if I get a sniff of both of those two, they're going to have a bad time. Because they're going to have a bad time because in our organization, you're not going to be the smartest person in the room. Sorry. There's just too many smart people. And two, you're not going to be perfect because nobody is. So like I've already got a problem if I got somebody who's giving me a vibe that that's how their self-image of how they view themselves is structured. And I kind of try to filter for that, when I'm interviewing and hiring. And if I do get somebody that has a whiff of that, I just know I've got a development area I need to pay attention to, because I want somebody that comes in and says, this being around smart people is like the most freaking amazing thing I've ever seen, because I got all these smart people that I can ask like stuff of, and they're going to make me smarter, and they're reading stuff that I'm not reading. And I just love that, right? I want people that are just rolling around in that, like a dog in stink. Like this is exciting and fun. Right. But and on the flip side, I also want somebody that when they do not have an identity crisis, when someone finds that they made a mistake, like let's just deal with the process or what they didn't know or whatever. Or if I ask them to reformat their SQL, I don't want that to be attacking their self-image. Right. Yeah. And so those are like a couple of the things I think about with analytical folks.
I found that person you're talking about that has to be perfect or wants to, I know who you're talking about, but a lot of analytics people also come in from the bottom side of that, which is a lot of imposter syndrome and lack of confidence. Yeah. And how do you identify that? Because I think that's a coaching issue the same as the other one is, kind of like what you just said. If they make a mistake, it'll really make them pull in sometimes. Yeah. And it's sort of, how do you let people know, like, hey, it's all right? Like, and you kind of gave one example of just the story you shared earlier about, you're like, hey, let me tell you a story about how I basically blew up a production system right in front of everybody.
Right. And we had to correct it, right? We had to publicly kind of correct it to lots of people in the organization.
And it was very visible, and I'm not dead. But I find like that's something that a lot of analytics people need, is some encouragement to sort of stay on that level, as opposed to like drift below the waterline, if you will, of their own confidence.
So the imposter syndrome, right, is real. And one of the, especially with new hires and people who are doing analytical work who were not, maybe that was not their academic background. So, they often constantly feel like, oh, I'm still trying to figure this out. And often they know more than the people who went through master's programs in data science, right? But they're always kind of feel that somebody else has more insight or something than they do. A couple of things we do by design in our team is I try to get young analysts to have early wins. And I think I gave you guys some examples of this in some documents we traded in the pre-read, right? And one example of this is the first code review. The way we do it is there's high mentorship. So somebody's been working and learning on their first thing they're writing, first piece of analytic, right? And it may just be some SQL scripts and a little bit of Python. They've been working with whoever hired them, right, to do that. So there's not going to be like, oh, this is awful, right? Because they've had a partner there with them who was experienced in mentoring them. And then it comes time to do the code review, and they're going to be real nervous. Well, guess what? It's incredibly safe, because there's just not going to be any bad surprises. And so this is exactly what you want to create, situations that feel risky and scary, but are actually really safe and are going to end positive. Because then you've got an analyst who goes through this thing and then discovers, hey, it's all great, right? They feel like I was shot at to no effect. This is wonderful. I'm euphoric. And this is how you build. That's a step for building trust. And then they discover, oh, that process isn't so scary. I had just, because if I'm not hiring developers, right? They've never been through a code review. And because they aren't developers and they're business people, they may be carrying around a lot of, I'm sure I'm not doing this right feelings. And we get them past that by basically letting them have wins.
Yeah, see, I feel like I'm totally fucking this up. I feel like that's a...
But you know what, Mo? You are, but it's okay. You know what? It's okay. This is safe.
No, because this point is so good, right? Like, we do a code review with our newbies, except the difference, I think, is by having the mentor work through the code with them, and it not being, because our first code reviews, I feel, can be pretty brutal because there are normally 100,000 changes. And I feel like everyone gets through it, but this would be a much nicer experience of like you work with someone and kind of peer program. So it's in like 95% good enough territory. So you get some feedback without it being like, we're knocking down the house and starting from scratch again kind of thing.
I don't want to demoralize an analyst right out of the gate, right? I want to do that first code review kind of fast and with relatively low risk. We start building trust. They see some of the design patterns because I've already helped them with that. And, then we're chugging. Then we're getting lots of relatively fast wins. And like my last analyst, when she had her first code review, I gave her a rubber duck, like from Amazon, like a big oversized rubber duck. Are you guys familiar with rubber duck debugging?
Yes, definitely. I've had people throw them at my desk because they're like, Mo, talk to the rubber duck and then bother me.
Well, let me explain rubber duck debugging because I'm sure everyone in the audience isn't, because this is one of those ideas I steal from sort of professional developers and bring over to the analytics space. The idea behind rubber duck debugging is when you have a challenge and you really can't quite figure out how to make it work, you take your rubber duck and you hold it and you explain your problem to your rubber duck. And it's amazing the number of times that your rubber duck will solve your analytics problem.
Did you know, Tim? So, Tim, you know how like normally you bother someone in the team and you're like, I want to talk about it out loud. And soon as you interrupt someone and start talking about it, you're like, oh my God, I figured it out. So you do the same thing, but with the rubber duck so that you don't take someone's time.
Well, I'm laughing because actually on the front of my kayak, which is like my escape place, and I'd found a rubber duck floating in the lake a year or so ago, and I've have it like strapped on the front of the kayak. And I think that's one of my places that I get away and let my brain not be looking at a screen. I might have unintentionally maybe the universe was telling me that I needed to talk to a rubber duck some more.
I think it's true.
That's amazing. That's so much better than read the fucking manual.
Well,
TFM. Isn't it? Yeah.
But there's going to be a whiff of a do your fucking job coming out here, because when someone makes a mistake, I'm thinking through when I have like been in kind of a mentoring type role or in a lot of times I'm reviewing some deliverables, and their analysts just, when they're straight, they often suck at deliverables. So I've got, okay, let's do feedback. Let's improve the presentation. And I see the ones that are like, okay, it's work because they had it and it's just the two of us, and they come out and they're like, wow, this is so much better. And then they're more comfortable coming to me and they learn and grow, and that's great. But then there are ones who are like, Tim, he's just going to keep giving, is there the risk if you make it too safe that if somebody makes a mistake, I want them to feel a little bit of accountability and be like, "Oh, I feel bad about that." I want them to take, but what did I learn? What am I going to do different? How do I move forward? And how do you avoid the misinterpretation of mistakes are not a problem? Shrug. This environment's cool. We can screw stuff up and nobody gets in trouble.
Yeah, so you're basically saying is by making this too safe, are you lowering the standards? Or
is there the risk for some people?
If you do it wrong, you can lower.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, if you're like, I'll make it safe by being laissez-faire and having no standards, you'll create an environment where people feel really comfortable producing crap. Okay. That's not the goal, right? That would be a mistake of leadership, right? What I want to create an environment of is I want a high-performing environment where high-performing individuals can feel safe iterating and performing at a high level. So I don't lower my standards. I just do evals faster so that we're not having the experience that Mo described where you have 10,000 edits. That's morally just demoralizing. And I know this, right? Because when we sent our cookbook second edition off to the copy editor, I can't remember. I have this note somewhere. The number of edits were so big that Adobe Acrobat would not be stable with that medium. They had to break the thing into 2 documents so that, because it could only handle 6,000, 6,258 comments was the most. And we had, 12,000. So they had to break it into 2 PDFs. And I got that document. And I got to tell you, I was sort of like, I'm kind of done with this. It
Maybe
almost
should have done
became a
this one
filter.
chapter at a time. Is that the
Right.
Yeah.
It almost became a filter, right? Now, fortunately, I was working with O'Reilly and one of their editors. So we used Copy Editor. One of their editors said, I can help you enter this directly into Git. And I said, in my Southern way, bless your heart, because I would have just walked away from the damn thing. And that's what we don't want in code reviews, right? Or any review of a deliverable product. What we also don't want is people interacting with Tim as an obstruction and routing around it. Because people will behave like a distributed network. And if there is pain, they will avoid pain. So we don't want them putting off having you look at it until like the night before, because Tim can only give me so much feedback because we're delivering this thing tomorrow. So they postpone in order to keep you in a small box, right? That's totally not the incentives. So we want to do like reviews quick and early. And one of the things I run into is more often with me is perfectionists, right? I've got folks who are used to maybe academia where nobody looks at their stuff until it's very polished, and like they won't commit and push multiple times a day. Yeah. And I'm like, no, push your junk, right? Like it's not gonna hurt. And plus then you have a backup, but don't wait until it's perfect and then put it on GitHub, right? Let's do lots of iterative stuff.
I think you just made a really important point, because there's a lot of analysts who are in environments where they feel pressure or are even asked to basically just provide one thunderclap of insight and nothing else, and no iterative process behind it. And it's sort of intuitive for me, is sort of like, whoa, our analysis is always way better when we kind of chunk it out and think through it a little bit and peck at it. And then we get to the end and we have a much better, because I used to work in a large agency, and a number of meetings would happen where we went away, did a bunch of analysis for the client, came back to present what we found, and the client's like, yeah, we already know that.
Yeah, totally.
And you're like, yeah, that makes sense, because you're actually running your business and we're just fucking around the edges. Yeah, I'm swearing a lot of this episode because I'm very passionate. But it got me thinking, because I was sort of like, I don't like that feeling. I hated that. Right. That was terrible. Right. How do we fix it? And I was like, well, you leave agencies first off, and then go do real analytics. But a lot of people are stuck in there, and I think it's one of the things I want to kind of turn towards is sort of psychological safety, or creating that environment that you're describing. I think happens at a lot of different levels. Everybody has to play a part, and it's almost like a gate system. It's like wherever it gets turned on, anyone below that can turn it off, and from a leadership perspective. Right. And if it's not turned on, it can get turned on lower, but it can't go up, right? So it's very individually dependent, it seems like. How do you, as a person sitting in a seat, how do you do actions that create it around you or promote it? And then the other piece of that is, how do we build more resilience in these kinds of systems, so that if like this boss who's amazing leaves, all of a sudden we're back to square one with all this psychological safety again.
So a bunch of this works best if you have evolved thinkers, leading, like I have C-level executives who have thought about this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And are leading by example. That works best.
Yep.
And then it's an issue of keep it propagating down. So make sure as each person begins to manage some, that they are ensuring their team is psychologically safe. And you could even ask them as a mentoree to a young manager what they're doing to foster psychological safety, or are there opportunities for you to share stories with your team, about situations that will help them understand the cultures in our organization around psychological safety, right? Or you can pick a different word, right? Like to Mo's point, I'm afraid psychological safety is getting watered down. It's going to become this magic pixie dust, kind of like data science, that we just sprinkle on a turd and hope we get something edible out the other side. And I think it's not that, right? So maybe we should replace it with other terms like being a decent human.
Yeah.
That might be the best metaphor visual that ever described in the history of this podcast, though. So
yeah, well, glad I could bring it.
But so can I just want to rewind a little bit, JD. You mentioned I guess there being like a bit of an iterative process when it comes to sort of feedback and that loop. As you were talking about that, the thing that I was trying to work through in my head is like, how much of that is the responsibility of the team and where is the stakeholders' involvement? So like if you are client side, you obviously work really closely normally with your business stakeholders, and even in agency land, like Helbs was talking about that, like you need some buy-in from your stakeholders. Right. Like, is this a process? It gets harder, I guess, to manage once you go outside of your team, but you also presumably do want their input because they're ultimately going to be, the final reviewers of the work. So from your experience, where's that balance?
So part of this is you're about to learn some things about my personality, right? I'm the kind of guy who when I walk on an airplane and I don't know who the sky marshal is, I must be the sky marshal, right? Like if something goes wrong, it's going to be my responsibility to fix it. I blame this on my agrarian upbringing where you're the mechanic, you're the plumber, you're the agronomist, you're the economist. If somebody asked me once if I was into DIY, and I was like, I don't even know what that means. What is that? Explain it. And they explained it. I said, you're just describing doing shit. So yeah, I do shit. If I don't do it, I don't know who's going to do it. Right. So yeah, I guess I'm into DIY. It just sounds like getting things done to me. So similarly, I always assume I'm the culture bearer, right? In any part of my organization that I'm working in. And so I look around, and one of the things I've noticed, for example, is I noticed that we have consultants that come and work with us on the IT side, kind of like extra staff. So they're not just coming in to do a specific thing. They're kind of like staff developers, but they're consultants. When they come in, I realize they don't talk in the group chats, and they tend to always ask questions in direct messaging to one person. And what does that tell me? They do not feel psychologically safe, right? So I will say, hey, good question. We should ask this in which, like we use Teams, whatever team channel has business people and IT people. We should ask that there because I bet there's other people who don't know this either. And I redirect those conversations into public, if you quote unquote public, into a group area and have those conversations there. And they discover, they weren't the only person who didn't know this or had this question. But it's a conscious effort by me because I'm seeing they're not safe, right? And I also have formulated a plan for other ways to help pull them in and feel safe. I could just acknowledge, like, don't do that, right? I could be gruff about it or whatever. But what I want to do is I want them to ultimately feel safe asking questions of the business people like myself and also their peers in IT. And I'm like, yeah, it makes sense to me that a consultant wouldn't feel safe. They got zero track record. So we got to figure out ways to build that. And similarly in the organization, I see sometimes business people don't partner with the development teams as tight as I think they should in order to get what they want built out of development teams. And some of that is safety and some of that is ownership. I think every business person who's the business owner of an IT project should see the success of that project as reflecting on them. But often they kind of have, a Tim approach of if those IT people would just do their fucking job, then this would all be fine, right? But so often they're missing, the IT people are missing information. And the business folks aren't coming to the meetings and they aren't talking about design with the developers. And in that case, I try to nudge my peers in the business side, right? And do a little mentoring. I can't tell them what to do, but I can sort of catch up with them and say, hey, I'm afraid over on your project, you're going to get something you don't like. You really need to move in with those folks and really get engaged because you could learn a lot from the process, right? So I can nudge. I can't tell them what to do.
Okay, I've decided it's time for a new book because as I've asked you things, I've already learned like two very, very good things. So like one is about the code reviews. The second is about like direct Slack messages to people and how you reroute them in a helpful way. I feel like this is your next book, like the practical shit for psychological safety. Like here are the actual things that work, not just like spouting about feeling safe.
Well, I guess there is a piece, and it kind of goes a little bit maybe towards the imposter syndrome, but I feel like in the absence of proactive efforts to kind of build psychological safety, there is a tendency for a lot of analysts to make a lot of assumptions that are wrong. Like I think, put aside the psychological, most environment, I will contend that most environments are much, much more forgiving of mistakes than the assumption of the analyst is.
Yeah.
And so there's this, and even with working with marketers, they're like, if I set a goal for a KPI and I miss it, like they behave as though a cardboard box will be delivered to them at the front door by security, when the reality is, and the same thing goes is kind of the iterative, like as Michael, you were talking about, like talking to the stakeholder as you're working on something. And there's this idea like they're going to freak out if I keep bothering them, you know, they're going to expect me to already know this. And so I think there's a degree of where just going through life with the assumption that like, if you make a mistake and it's the end of your role, if that hurts your career, well, good, because you're probably not at the right company, right? I mean, like let's map this out. Do you want to work in an environment where that is the case? So I think there's a little bit of an onus that can go back on the individual contributor to say, whether you have somebody actively trying to promote it, which I think they should be promoting psychological safety and showing and demonstrating, there's also a part to say you're probably safer than you think. And the fact is, to behave that way, you gather really good data as to whether or not you're safe. Plus, you actually are modeling for your peers and people who are more junior. So, I feel like I push that a lot to people.
I think folks assume they aren't safe until they have empirical evidence to contradict that. Right. And that's rational risk-taking behavior, right? That kept us from getting eaten by lions in the jungle as we evolved, right? To just always assume the negative.
that saber-tooth tiger probably won't eat me. Yeah. That's probably not
there were people who had that view, right? And they got filtered out of the gene pool, right? Yeah. So we are the ones who are just paranoid as shit, right? That's how we got here genetically. Is we just assumed everything was going to screw us over, everything was going to eat us, and lots of problems were going to be had. So what's left is Homo sapiens who want to collaborate, but also are not very trusting sometimes, right? Because we fear danger, and we see it as danger until we're given lots of evidence to the contrary. So a whole bunch of the stuff I talked about is really about like the code review and the me telling anecdotes about screwing up and all that. What I'm really doing is I'm trying to give empirical evidence to skeptical humans. I'm trying to give them empirical evidence that they're safe. And they need to experience that viscerally, and then they will begin to experience safety. The stories help. They aren't enough. One experience helps, but it's not enough. They kind of need a track record of it. And so there's nothing in the world wrong with manufacturing those experiences, right? You do this with kids, you manufacture experiences and they grow, right? We do that with school. Why not set up things like the code review or other, and all these, by the way, are way more useful than the bullshit HR is going to come up with, because they're going to have you do trust falls and a bunch of contrived crap that everybody is going to smell the BS on, right? But what will really resonate with people is things like actually doing something with them, mentoring them, reviewing their code and saying, hey, this is really great. I love that you did this, but we always do this part this way, and here's why. And they realize, I can get redirected and I don't get fired, and hey, I looked at the code you committed last night on GitHub. That was really cool, right? Oh shit, somebody's noticing that I'm pushing code. I didn't ask him for a review. And not only that, but he said something good about it. Now I may have had 3 thoughts of things like, when we code review, I'm going to straighten some junk out in there. What I'm going to say is if there's, I'm not going to blow smoke, right? If there's really something like, and my analysts regularly do this. They figure out a way to solve a problem I never would have thought of. I tell them that crap every time I see it, right? Catch them doing right, whether it's your peer or your subordinate, right?
It's actually the same as dog training.
It really is. I wasn't going to say that because it may sound condescending to people who don't love dogs as much as I do.
It's not meant to be. It's like you reinforce the good and you ignore the bad.
Mo, I just want to know how Harry's first code review goes. And if you could,
Well, I would second JD that a book along these lines might actually be a very, very positive thing, because there are thousands and thousands of analytics managers and directors and vice presidents now that didn't exist in the world 15 years ago that are just starting to really try to grapple with a lot of these things, and there's not a lot of guidance out there. And it's interesting because I also did a presentation on empathy and said that analysts were uniquely suited to take this on. And so I'm like, part of me is like, man, could 15 years ago me come and work for you? Because I would have avoided so much pain and suffering over the years if we could have been part of a team like that. But there's so many good lessons there.
It was our studio conference, right, where you did the empathy.
Yeah. So actually, that was the first time I did that was at New York R conference.
Okay.
And I think it was a couple of folks at our studio heard about that and were kind of like, hey, this is actually part of what we value in our organization. And they invited me as an invited presenter to come speak at the our studio conference.
All that is to say the session is available on YouTube.
Twice on YouTube, right?
Twice on YouTube.
The R one is on the R studio one is on their site. They use a different hosting than YouTube, but you can get it at rstudio.com. They've got all their conference presentations up there. So it's there. It's also on YouTube for the New York R conference.
All right, it's time for the quizzical query. That's usually a conundrum for both of my co-hosts. It's the Conductrix quiz, and joined by our special guest quiz taker, JD Long, is sticking around. Thank you, Hillary Parker, for making that seem like a thing that people should do. Let's talk really quickly about our sponsor, which is Conductrix. The Analytics Power Hour and the Conductrix Quiz are sponsored by Conductrix. They build industry-leading experimentation software for A/B testing, adaptive optimization, and predictive targeting. You can go find out more at Conductrix.com to see how they can help you with your experimentation programs. All right. So would you like to know, Tim, who you are competing for?
Do tell.
It's actually a very close friend of yours. His name is Adam Greco. That's right, Adam.
Oh, dear.
So, Tim, no pressure. And Mo and JD, our listener you are playing for, is Joe Ebeler.
G'day,
who
Joe.
is a good friend of the show.
Hey, Joe.
All right. So, here we go. Many times, it's not feasible or even possible to run A/B tests where we're able to assign treatments to individuals. However, often we can assign treatments at an aggregate level. For example, experiments that test educational programs may assign treatments to classrooms or to schools so that everyone within a class or school is exposed to the same treatment. Or for marketing promotions, we may assign treatments at the store or geo level. These types of A/B tests are called cluster RCTs, random controlled trials. While cluster RCTs are often less complex and hence less costly to implement, there is no free lunch. Cluster RCTs will tend to have less power than a standard RCT with the same sample size. This is because students in the same class or shoppers from the same store are often, in some sense, much more similar to each other than compared to a random collection of students or shoppers, and hence each sample provides less marginal information. What is the term used for the measure of similarity within cluster RCTs? Is it A, CCR, cluster covariance rate? Or is it B, ICC, intraclass correlation? Is it C, ISC, intrastore correlation? Or D, KLD, Kullback-Leibler divergence? It might be Leibler, I don't know. E, ECA, effective cluster assignment. All right, so there we have it.
I want y'all to know this was written by Matt Gershoff, who's a buddy of mine and a drinking buddy. This is exactly what it's like hanging out at the pub with Gershoff.
That's right, exactly.
Exactly like this.
It's hard to feel smart sometimes with Matt in the same room as you, but at least he's very nice.
It's fun. If the bar's crowded, then
Yeah.
the more he talks, the more space. Like
we
the
get
bar.
we get the corner to ourselves.
That's right.
5 minutes in, there's nobody within 15 feet.
All right. So,
Great.
JD, you've learned one key tip about the quiz, which is procrastinate around answering. That's good.
Yeah, so Tim, it's your go. Go for it.
That's right.
Oh, good. I'm just going to eliminate C then, because I am pretty confident it's not intrastore.
Oh, okay.
So I can eliminate one.
Intrastore correlation. C. I agree. That one didn't even, for me, I didn't even think that one was correct. You are absolutely right. So now we're down to 4 options.
They can pick the winner, or they can eliminate another one.
So Mo, like the issue here is like correlation or covariance, right? And the first 2 had that in the name. I mean, I know that's the underlying principle. I got to admit, I've never heard of any of these terms. So I don't do A/B testing and reinsurance. So
you make a prediction and
exactly, and then hope my career runs out before we figure out if it was right or not. Do you have any thoughts here, Mo, about any that we could either choose or eliminate?
Well, I think we can eliminate E possibly for the same reasons that you were just mentioning. My only complicating factor is I did not get down what D is. So
D, KLD, Kullback-Leibler divergence. Kullback-Leibler divergence. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly. I apologize.
I'm leaning towards eliminating E.
Let's do it.
Effective cluster assignment. All right, let's go to the board. Boop, 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 boop. Yes, you can eliminate E. All right, we're now down to 3 options. A, cluster covariance rate. B, ICC, interclass correlation. C, oh no, we got rid of C. So now which one did we get rid of?
We've got A, B, and D left.
Yeah.
A, B, and D. Sorry, my bad. So KLD, Kullback-Leibler divergence are our only 3 left. A, B, and D. Thank you, Mo. You should try this side, Mo. It's really, you're good at it.
Yeah, what was A fully was what?
CCR, cluster covariance rate.
As a John Fogerty fan, I'm pretty partial to that.
Oh, I like it. Yeah.
Having literally just wrapped up the lyrics to Bad Visualization, the parody of Bad Moon Rising that will be coming to
fantastic.
I'm going to go ahead and just kind of end this all because it's not D, and I think I'm going to say that it is A, partly for the CCR. It's got to be A or B. I'm right there with JD, but I'm just going to jump all the way ahead and say I'm going to go with A.
I think it's B. So let's find out.
All right. So
Okay.
Tim thinks it's A. JD and Mo good with B.
Yeah.
All right. Let's say that instead of saying Tim got it wrong, why don't we say that JD and Mo got it right? It is ICC, interclass correlation. Woo. Congratulations, Joe Ebeler. You're a winner.
Yay,
Also a good friend of mine.
Yeah, he's from that area. Your area.
He is right here. I'm actually having a virtual lunch with him.
Try to be careful about doxing our listeners on the podcast, so I don't say where he's from. But he is on Twitter, so if you look around, you might be able to find him.
I wanted to look in Field Experiments, the book, and confirm
and
that it's
see
a chapter that I have not yet gotten to, which doesn't that applies to most of the chapters. So.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
like we said before, we're very thankful to Conductrix for sponsoring the Conductrix quiz. Please check them out at conductrix.com. And now let's get back to the show.
JD, we've talked a few times during this show about a blameless postmortem.
Right.
And we've kind of touched on it. And I feel like people that work in tech have like a vague idea about it. But can you just explain a little bit about how this works in your team? How do you, I guess, set up this process?
Yes. So first of all, let me tell you, they use this term in Agile, and I have no idea if they're talking about exactly the same thing or not. The version of this that I have in my head is more like, what is it, Syed, the guy who we talked about at the beginning of this conference, who wrote the book Black Box Thinking. What I'm thinking about is more like that. So that first. Second, we don't call it a blameless postmortem.
What do you call it?
That's what it is. We don't call it anything. It's just reviewing. And we just do it all the time. Right? And now it may be helpful in some teams to have a name for the thing. We do it. We just don't put the flag down and say we're going to do this now.
Interesting.
we'll review what happened, when something gets wrong, or goes wrong or goes right. Even when we're at the end of a project, we'll do a review, a recap, and we'll talk about, okay, what things do we wish had gone differently, or what do we think the root cause of, like the one where I screwed up the greater than or equals in some SQL, right? We talk about, okay, what was the root cause of this? And it was like, well, the root cause was we were trying to move too fast, and I didn't get a second set of eyes on my change because my change was pretty trivial. I changed 3 lines of code. It just happened one of those lines of code was had the greater than equal in there, and I screwed it up, right? So, okay, well, how would we change the process? And we're like, well, we could have given ourselves more time, and we should make sure that no matter how trivial the change, we get somebody else to look at it, right? And we slowly have changed how we do. We call it second set of eyes on code. It's kind of a little lower bar than a code review. It's just somebody else has looked at this, right? It doesn't mean we've gone through and discussed in great detail. It's just somebody else has looked at it. And we found, I'm in an analyst team, right? A business team, not an IT development team. We try to steal the 10% or 20% of things that IT professional developers do that will give us like 80 or 90% of the value. So we do a bunch of stuff like a light version of, we use Git and GitHub, right, to check all our code in, but we don't necessarily do branching and every feature on its own branch exactly the same way our IT teams do. We do it in a way that works smoothly with our workflow. And so similarly, when we do the blameless postmortem, what we're really looking through is what Tim, I think, noted about process. We're trying to figure out, if we didn't get a good outcome, why? Because if we're getting second sets of eyes on things, if we're have enough time, if our analysts are iterating quickly and getting folks to glance at their work, right, we should be producing the right stuff. And if we're not, well, what's the mistake? What's the change in the process that we need to make in order to get that outcome? So, that's kind of it. The analyst that works for me, she's been around for 6 months. And I bet if you ask her, what's it like doing a blameless postmortem with JD, she would be like, I don't know what you're talking about.
What are you talking about?
Yeah. Now, she and I have reviewed her work, right? And some of that has elements of a blameless postmortem, but she never had a big blow up, right? And maybe she'll sit in on one, right? If we have something come off the skids at some point, but we get very little of that, which, by the way, this is a point we probably should have made earlier. Part of the reason you want psychological safety is folks will be more transparent about their mistakes if they are confident they're not going to get killed because of the screw up. And you want an environment where people will reveal early and often when something bad happened. I mean, there was an incentive when I screwed that up to cover my tracks and make sure nobody noticed and try to just fix it next quarter, right? We'll just sneak that in next quarter and see, hopefully nobody notices. Now, I'm not saying I would have done that, but I'm saying if somebody hadn't felt safe, there was an incentive to do that, to try to cover up mistakes. That's totally going to screw your team up, right? So you got to produce enough safety so that people will be transparent saying what's happened. And the other thing is, it's also, even if they do fix and even if they do acknowledge it, don't want to talk about it. Oh, sweet Jesus, then everybody's going to know, right? And so if you don't have a safe culture, then the rest of your team doesn't learn from the mistakes. And the learning from mistakes is the difference between a fragile system, an unfragile system, and an anti-fragile system. This kind of steals from Taleb's definition of anti-fragile. The idea with an anti-fragile system is that after mistakes or things go bad, the system adjusts so that it is more robust as a result of that process. The way you build anti-fragility in human teams, you got to have safety. Now, you can build teams that are fragile. That's easy. You can even build teams that are tough in that things don't fail very much. They're tough. But to get them to be where when they do fail, the team afterwards is actually stronger and produces better work product after a failure, that's anti-fragile. And that requires psychological safety, which is ironic because Taleb does not strike me as someone who would be on a psychological or create a psychologically safe team, right? He seems like a rockin' asshole. And so I think it's ironic that his principle here of anti-fragility sort of is part of this idea of psychological safety.
Awesome. Okay. To keep our listeners psychologically safe, we do have to start to wrap up.
Let's do it.
But that's not really why we do it, but we do have to. Anyway, this has been an amazing conversation. JD, thank you so much. I'm serious. That you either need to start a podcast or write a book or both. And there are thousands and thousands of people who want to learn these kinds of things. I would imagine.
You're a middle-aged white dude, so I think you might be the only person who hasn't started a podcast.
It's shocking that I don't have one already.
Yeah. We could give you some pro tips. No, we can't. No, we can't. All right. Well, one thing we do like to do is we'd like to go around the horn and share what we call a last call. Anything that we think might be of interest to our listeners. So, JD, you're our guest. Do you have a last call you'd like to share?
I do. And this is straight off of the Twitter machine from today, a little discussion. There was a article written by Paul Lockhart, and I'll give it to you all. Do you all do show notes? I'll give it to you and you put
yes,
in show notes.
We do.
Yeah, great. I'll send you a link to this. It was written in 2002 by Paul Lockhart, who's a mathematics teacher, and it's called A Mathematician's Lament. And he goes through and examines like what it might look like if we taught music the way we teach mathematics. And this comes up periodically, right? This goes viral like every 2 years, it seems like, for the last 20. And I think it is so interesting. Now, it like all analogies is not perfect, but it's really interesting because it talks about basically all of the heavy lifting and transposing of notes before anyone would be allowed to play a tune, right? If you were teaching music the way we teach math. And I feel like so much math, data science, and analytics gets taught best when people have an application for it, when they see a use and a need. And the equivalent would be like learning to play guitar by learning riffs. So learn your favorite guitar riffs. And then off of that, you would maybe be motivated to learn your circle of fifths because you want to understand, like, why does that riff work? Or why is this guitar player able to do this solo? Like, how can you even put that together? Well, there's a whole bunch of music principles that make that work. But if you're forced to learn those music principles before you want to do your guitar solo, it's not very motivating. And the shit's kind of boring. And I feel like a bunch of math and analytics and programming and all that has similar characteristic in that we'd be way more motivated if we had something we were interested in and taught it in that context. So, Mathematician's Lament.
I like it.
Link will be coming at you.
We got it already, actually. I saw it on the Twitter.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Awesome. All right, Mo, what about you? What's your last call?
It's a little bit of a long-winded story to get there, but Canva has a whole bunch of clubs. So there's like a steak club, a water club, a gin club, a bike club. There is also a channel called Investing Club. Now, there are 700 plus people in this channel, right? Of people that talk about money and stocks and all sorts of stuff. And I'm not going to lie, it tends to be your certain age range, white dude talking about very complicated investment concepts. And a few women at work and I were kind of musing about how, I don't know, financial literacy, give me a few beverages and a soapbox. Financial literacy for women is something I'm incredibly, incredibly interested and passionate about. And lots of women have this like real barrier to investing. So anyway, one of the girls from our group posted, I guess, a noob question of like, hey, I want to buy this international stock. I don't know how to do it. And the group was actually amazing. Like lots of people wrote back really supportive answers of like, hey, here's how you go about setting up your account, yada, yada, yada. And so then I kind of posted being like, hey, I'm really glad that you asked this kind of noob question because it's made this channel feel like a place where people can come and like learn more and ask for beginner tips. And some of the people who had been in the channel for a long time are like, oh, that's a really good point. Like we probably should do more of this sort of stuff. And so anyway, spin off from that now, one of the women at Canva who works in brand marketing reached out to this amazing podcast called You're in Good Company, which is two women who actually did a spin-off of another podcast called Equity Mates because they were listening to these two guys talking about investment and were like, the barrier of what they're talking about is just so hard I can't follow. So they did a like, I don't know, I guess a like you're just getting your feet wet in investment kind of podcast spin-off called You're in Good Company, which is these two women. They're amazing. And so now we've got both of the podcasts coming to Canva to talk to us at both levels of like, you're an introductory investor. like you want to understand how to set up your account, how to like look at a different investment opportunity and what its pros and cons are and that sort of thing. And then we have like the more advanced guys also coming along to talk about that. And I don't know, it just felt like both of these podcasts are really phenomenal, but it also is like a nice way to type this like psychological safety of sometimes if you're really worried about asking something in a group, if you're that person that has the confidence to do it, you might give someone else the confidence to also ask in that group. So very, very long-winded story.
I tracked 7 different cases where I thought this was going to veer off into a mansplaining story. I feel like that was, and they were probably there all along the way. It was just like right along the brink. Oh, wow. Impressive.
Yeah. So 2 really good podcasts.
Speaking of mansplaining, Tim, what's your last call? No, I was kidding.
Mine will be short. I've been kind of dabbling and playing around. I'm kind of fascinated by generative art. I've been doing my own little tinkering with not generative art, but image manipulation with like now I'm filling my Twitter feed with a daily tweet that is R and GitHub Actions and photography. But along the course of that, I came across app.wombo.art, which is you literally just enter any old phrase you want. You pick one of like 6 or 7 themes. I think you have like 100 characters, and then it sits there and cranks away. There's not a whole lot of explanation of what it's doing and how it's doing it, because it takes a little while to kind of generate the art, but it winds up creating different sort of themed art pieces based on the words that you enter, and it can definitely be a time suck. So app.wombo.art.
I got a buddy who's been playing with something similar. I'm not sure if it's literally the same one. And in his TVs in his house show the art. So he makes a folder and puts the ones in that he's interested in, and then it shows them on the TV. He's got an app on his TV that cycles through them and shows them each for 20 minutes or something.
I could, because there's deepdreamgenerator.com is another one that my son had pointed me to, which kind of is a neural network dreaming of different things, which is also kind of
very trippy. Trippy. Yeah.
So it's a fun area. And the stuff I've been noodling with is I'm trying to keep it to where I kind of understand what's going on with some image magic and stuff. But yeah, it's kind of fun. I probably should not have started a text message with my mother about it, because she got very confused but was determined to understand it. And that really, I was not feeling psychologically safe by the end of that exchange. Michael, what's your last call?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Something that doesn't make a lot of people feel psychologically safe is the fact that they a lot of times have Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics on their website all at the same time. But recently, Frederick Werner posted a blog post that I thought was pretty cool, where he shows step-by-step how to import Google Analytics data into Adobe Analytics using their data sources tool, which is nice. It's sort of a technical walkthrough, but if you're using those tools, you might run across a couple use cases where that could come in handy. So I think we've probably mentioned Frederick's work on the podcast many times before. So anyway, great blog post, really well done as always by Frederick, and that's my last call. All right, you've probably been listening and you're like, these are great tips, but I also have something I'd like to share. Well, we'd love to hear it. And the best way to do that is through either the Measure Slack group, which is a great place that is committed to your psychological safety, and also our LinkedIn group, which is less so, and also on Twitter. I mean, just because we don't do a lot with our LinkedIn group, but on Twitter as well. We'd love to hear from you. And as I mentioned off at the top of the show, JD is also on Twitter at CMastication, just cerebral mastication, and you should follow him for sure, because then you will not have to wait till the next time he's on our podcast to learn about the things he's thinking about on a daily basis, which I highly recommend.
And laugh.
And laugh. Yeah, it's pleasant.
It's a very serious academic feed. What are you talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Let's just talk about your pinned tweet for just a second.
Okay.
It's your boat, 404 fish not found, which I think is hilarious. So
my daughter named the boat. Good job, kid.
Nice. So anyway, JD, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an honor and a privilege. Really, really wonderful to have you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I love what y'all are doing with the podcast. I've enjoyed listening to the back episodes. So keep up the good work.
Well, thank you very much. And honestly, the podcast just wouldn't happen without our illustrious producer, Josh Crowhurst. So no show is complete without a thank you to him and all his hard work behind the scenes to make the show a reality. And I know that I speak for both of my co-hosts, Mo and Tim, when I say no matter how hard you're struggling, no matter if your rubber duck isn't telling you the answers, just remember, keep analyzing.
Thanks for listening. Let's keep the conversation going with your comments, suggestions, and questions on Twitter at @AnalyticsHour, on the web at analyticshour.io, our LinkedIn group, and the Measured Chat Slack group. Music for the podcast by Josh Crowhurst.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.
Analytics. Oh my God. What the fuck does that even mean?
And my stool's squeaky, so I'm going to get off of it and do standing desk. So
Oh, wow.
introduce Squeaky Butt to
See, Mo, see, Michael, the guests sometimes, they care about the quality.
You guys seem like a fastidious bunch.
Oh, well, Tim is fastidious enough for all of us.
I did this oversized rubber duck with my last analyst's first code review and or I guess first pull request, and I'm gonna start doing that. And it was funny. She told me, she said, "Do you know about my history with rubber ducks?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know about your history." She's like, "Oh, at my last job, I used to make a rubber duck.
Rubber duck killed my family."
I have had facial hair of one kind or another, and we had been married about like a couple years. We didn't have a kid yet, and I was like, "I may trim my beard." And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's good. Go ahead and shave your beard." And so I shaved, and I came out of the bathroom, feeling clean faced, and my wife said, "Oh my God, put it back."
Put it back. You're like, well,
Nice.
And she's like, "Wow, I didn't know you didn't have a chin."
Married you under false pretenses. Wasn't there some teaser that your hair was going to change, or what's
Yeah,
the story?
wasn't your hair going to change?
I think probably in about a week. I think I've got a.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think
All right.
I think it's getting cut.
New year, new you.
I don't know what it's
I
gonna
kind of
be.
want to see it just for comparison.
What it used to be.
I just
You know
haven't
me.
seen. I know I knew you then, but I just don't remember what it looked like. I feel. Yeah, because I feel like the rest of your face has aged so much. Like, now it'll be a whole new look.
The rest of my face has aged so much. That's wow.
You're so old looking.
Rough crowd in here.
Whew.
Yeah. All right. Here we go. I wish my dogs would stop barking. That's not a euphemism for my feet.
Is that your warm-up vocal? I wish my dog
Yeah.
would stop barking.
I wish my dog
would stop barking.
The quick brown fox. Shut up, you fucking dogs. All right. We'll go in 3.
Rock flag and blameless poor smoke.
Sorry, Tim, that was all your fault.
Hey, no, it's blameless. It's okay, Tim. It's okay.
Rock flag and blameless postmortems.